Buongiorno, linguini. Come stai oggi? It's me, Jack, your linguistics friend. Well, oh, that went a little bit of Transylvanian Dracula there at the end. Sorry about that. Accent failure. Well, welcome to episode 9c, which is primarily about one text, the 13th century Ancrene Riwle, and I know those are some funny looking words. I also want to point out that we're stepping back about a century into some earlier Middle English, now that we've gotten used to Chaucer, and we're also moving to a different dialect of Middle English. So this text, there's not a lot of it, but it will look a little bit more unfamiliar, a bit more Old Englishy than the Chaucer we've been looking at. So before we gear up for that, let's have a little bit of fun with words. One of the things I've been doing since I was a teeny tiny linguist is keeping a list of spurious etymologies, and this is today's tidbit. Spurious, by the way, means false, fake, illegitimate. It's from the Latin spurius, meaning a bastard. An illegitimate child. That, by the way, is a true etymology. The rest of the etymologies on this list will not be. They're fun things that I've made up along the way, because if you're going to spend your time doing etymologies, you might as well have some fun and create some. So, topping the list we have decadent, an adjective. It's from the Latin from having 10 teeth. Deca, 10 like decade, and dent like dentist. Example, 1910, the decadent llama labored to gnash the branny mush. Ironic, an adjective, an object or person made of or resembling iron or given to habitual ironing. The charwoman at the King's Arms was often ironic, particularly of a Wednesday night. I give you citations for all of these so that they look extra official. Graffito, by the way, is singular of graffiti. Agnostic, noun from the Latin agnus, meaning lamb. So an agnostic is not, as we commonly think, someone with no evidence for the existence of God, sort of worshipping the great I don't know, but rather a lamb worshipper. And the quote here is from Bede, Historia Ecclesiastica Gigantorem Anglorum, ecce agnostic Dei. Perhaps you have friends. Perhaps you're an agnostic yourself. Allegorical. This one gets more historical all the time. Something said by Bill Clinton's vice president. As in, the film, An Inconvenient Truth, that was that first film that won many awards about global warming and pollution, retorted the agnostic vice president was allegorical. Officious. You might be mistaken about the meaning of this word, too. Something is officious. It's anything done by or pertaining to Michael Scott. For instance, Scott exhibits the most officious leadership qualities at the Scranton branch of Dunder Mifflin. That's from Who's Hot, Who's Not Journal of the American Dental Association, Proceedings 1984, Volume 2, which is an excellent occasion for me to point out the coolest thing about myself. And it's not just that I'm a fan of The Office, enjoyed watching it, but that I actually went to high school with two of its cast members, as did my wife, Elizabeth. There on the right, you probably know Ed Helms. He's got quite a movie career going. He was a couple years below me, and his older brother Paxton Helms, was in my grade. Paxton and I hung out some. I remember that Paxton, when we went over to his house, had this sort of nerdy younger brother who kind of played by himself in a corner. Turns out that was Ed Helms. The other Office cast member I went to school with was Kevin, Brian Baumgartner, who looked exactly like that when he was 19. He had more hair, actually. Kevin was big into the theater scene, whereas I was a trombone player, and so I can still remember him singing in, like he would be up on stage and I would be below the stage in the orchestra pit, doing The Music Man or Babes in Arms or South Pacific. And there's one episode in which he's not allowed to play in the basketball game because he's a big guy and they don't think he can play. And at the end credits, if you notice, he's just swishing three-pointer after three-pointer. I've seen him do that. So in case you were wondering, that is the most interesting thing about me. Back to our list. Luster. It's a comparative adjective. The luster of something. Having a greater sexual appetite than. Rabbits are known to be luster than hares. It's a journal of science and sciencey stuff. Sensuous. Making good sense. Before her death, untimely death, a Playboy model, centerfold Anna Nicole Smith was widely held among the international community to be one of the most sensuous Americans, all things considered. To deliver, it's a verb. To surgically remove the liver, as in the quote, in an overwhelming act of seasonal compassion, the Girl Scouts of America personally delivered 2,000 Christmas turkeys. All right, let's go international. Parasite. Noun, a wimpy flesh-devouring freeloader, or two, totally unrelated, a person from the capital of France, as in the decadent, that is, having 10 teeth, parasite dined lavishly on the digestive tract of a gastropod before surrendering suddenly to the Germans. Winston Churchill personal conversation with myself on Mars. To germinate. We can't take on Paris if we're not going to take on Germany as well. To be a naturalized German citizen. Or to invade Poland. Or to be David Hasselhoff, star of Knight Rider, which I watched when I was 14, talking car, very fun, and Baywatch. And the following is actually true. When the Berlin Wall was coming down in 1989, when I was a freshman in college, there'd been the Berlin Wall for 35 years, and I'd lived through the Cold War my whole life, where Russia was this great enemy, and the Iron Curtain divided East and Western Europe and divided the two halves of Germany. I grew up with two Germanys. And when the wall came down, dividing Berlin and dividing Germany in half, David Hasselhoff, who was also apparently a rock musician, well, just listen to the quote. In hopes of germinating, I'll leave it up to you to decide which meaning that is, the star of Knight Rider and Baywatch sent a signed glossy of himself to the Berlin Museum immediately following the fall of the wall in Berlin in November 1989. He actually did that. I hear he attributes to a concert he played there a good deal of the responsibility for bringing down the Berlin Wall. It's from one or the other Guinness Book editions that I read on my Kindle. All right, we warmed up. Let's do some linguistics. I told you that we're reading a text which is not from the London dialect, but from a different dialect. So dialects. We recognize 5 within Middle English. Of course, these are not absolutely different. They have continuums of change between them and within them, and over time, because, as I mentioned, things are bloody hard in Middle English. So there's Northern, getting up towards Scotland. The York plays, if you've read the mystery play cycles, that's Northern. Southwest doesn't have anything significant on our map. We have some other abbreviations. In the East Midlands, by the way, would include where Chaucer is from. London, follow like that little inlet on the east side, southeast side. That's the Thames River. Major channel, major port of London, Londinium, a Roman city. That's where the crown is, the king, sometimes queen. That's where trade is centered. That's one of the great trading rivers of England. I apologize if you heard a click there. I had to pause the recording for a moment. It's 9:30 on Friday, first of Friday of the month, and every first Friday of the month at 9:30 they test the tornado sirens, and so it sounded like the Nazis were bombing London here for a minute. Note to self: if there is ever an actual tornado at 9:30 on Friday, the first Friday of the month, we are all going to die. Just FYI, note to self. Where was I? I was saying that we were reading Chaucer, and Chaucer's the East Midlands dialect. It contains London, and that is the dialect of these five that went on to take over, to become the standard. And the reason that dialect became the standard and became the main ancestor of standard modern English, and thus Chaucer is the most readable to us out of the writers in all the dialects, is because London in East Midlands is the prestige dialect. It's where the crown is, it's the center of trade, it's where the greatest French influence happened as well, and it's where some very famous authors wrote, and their works being transmitted, like Chaucer and Gower, and the author of Sir Orfeo, helped achieve a literary prestige for the region. But we're going to the West Midlands, which is where we can locate Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. You might have read that. The Harley manuscript, from which Lentin is Como with Luova Tutun is from, and other lyrics. Lawman's Brut, an earlier text, and also Piers Plowman. Those texts known to be a little bit tougher because, again, they are in a version of Middle English, which is not the one which became the ancestor of our English, and thus they seem more distant, more foreign. They're not the forms that became normal to us. So, the Ancrene Riwle is a rule, not a ruler, but a rule, a guide, for anchoresses. Well, what is an anchoress? You might be thinking, Katie Couric, she was an anchoress, right? To host an evening news program? No. An anchoress, that's a female member of the Navy. No, still wrong. An anchoress is that woman in the block tomb there, being blessed by the priest. An anchoress is a kind of woman expressing Christian piety in the Middle Ages. An anchoress in the OED is a female anchorite, which is wonderful as long as you know what an anchorite is. It's a thing that falls to earth if it doesn't burn up on reentry. No, an anchorite is a person who has withdrawn or secluded him, or in this case herself, thank you OED, from the world, usually for religious reasons, a recluse, a hermit. Every religion that I know of, most of them at least, have some kind of nun or monk who says, I'm going to separate myself from this world to focus on prayer or meditation, almost like the seafarer goes out to sea to separate himself from the joys of land, to concentrate on the fact that this world is not our home in the religious view, or that the world is our enemy of our spirit, or some version of that. An anchorite, an anchoress, is a species of nun. My definition would be an uber nun who has a sign of dying to this world. And it's true that before entering monasteries in some traditions, some orders, or before becoming an anchoress, they would hold a funeral for you. You know the verse in the Bible, die to this world and live for Christ. They would hold a sort of funeral, that your earthly life is over and you've begun your spiritual life. Well, these are uber nuns who thought that just joining a monastery, a nunnery, was not enough seclusion or separation. They would have them permanently walled into these in these masonry cells inside or adjoining churches, with only a slot to receive food, remove waste, and observe and take the Eucharist. And they would stay in there till they died. So it basically was their tomb. So that woman with her head sticking out, she's never leaving there. And she's going to stay in there to avoid earthly pleasure, to focus on God, and that's the rest of her life. Here is from a capital letter, the enclosing of an anchoress. You can see she's being blessed or possibly buried as she enters that room that she will never leave again. See bars on the walls? And that's just an objectively funny Peanuts cartoon. It has a very small audience, I know, but I love jokes with small audiences. Here's an example of one. You can see on the right that hole in the wall and an outline of where there's been another structure there. That's where an anchorite's cell would have been built so that she can look in and you could see the sacristy and you can observe the Eucharist, observe Mass. But she would have been walled in there. They've removed it since, but you can tell where it was actually there. Someone passed their life in that. There's a movie called The Anchoresses. Apparently it was some years one of the 10 best. Sundance official selection did what it can. I just want to point out that Variety magazine found it poetically sexy, which after all I think is the point of becoming an anchoress in the true, original spurious meaning of the term. Well, I can't give you all the cultural and religious and historical background I need to for you to really understand the concept of being an anchoress, but I thought I would just give you one idea and this is not about our anchoress or the Ancrene Riwle or her order, just a general principle of monasticism in the Middle Ages. It involved silence. This goes back to the rule of St. Benedict, a sort of founding guide for monasticism or eremiticism. And one of the things that St. Benedict said was to worship and love God, shut up. In his words, at all times the monks ought to practice silence, but most of all at night, whether fasting or eating, at mealtime, when they've risen from the table, shall sit together. One shall read maybe from the lives of the church fathers or something to edify the hearers. When they gather, they shall say a prayer, and then after the completorium, there shall be no further opportunity for anyone to say anything, and if you do, a very severe punishment. Just think for a moment that medieval life doesn't have all the noises of modern life. The hustle and bustle of taxis in cities, airplanes overhead, tornado sirens on 9:30 on Fridays. It was already quiet. To go to a monastery was to vow even greater silence, and then to have yourself stone-walled into a cell is to take on an even greater degree of isolation and silence in order to concentrate on that which you've devoted yourself to concentrating on. This, by the way, I believe was St. Augustine's favorite t-shirt. I like to think it was. So let's get to the Ancrene Riwle, or I have a habit of giving texts new names, the Cackling Eve. We're going to walk through this. The text will be on the screen along with an interlinear translation. We're going to focus on some words, and you're going to have some literature-type questions, thematic questions to answer for the homework. So we're going to start by drawing, this is an excerpt, we're going to start by drawing a contrast between Eve and Mary. Old Testament Eve, particularly involved in the fall, and Mary from the New Testament, particularly involved in the birth of the Savior, Jesus Christ. So let's read, and I'll just point out some things. Eve, and notice that U makes a V sound, because U and V were the same letter at this point in time and space. Eve held in Paris, that's a French word, longe tale mid te neder. What we've just said is that if you go back to Genesis, Eve has a conversation with the serpent. And that's what we're focusing on. A longe tale, a long talk. She talked a lot to the serpent. Notice the word for serpent is neder. Take off the N, and it looks like the word adder, which is a kind of snake. And in fact, the word adder was originally nadder, just like the word uncle was originally nuncle, and just like the word nother was other, but we had rebracketing. Remember rebracketing from McWhorter? Where the N jumped over from an and attached itself to the noun. This went in the other direction. It was a nadder, a snake. Today we have an adder, a particular kind of snake. So what did Eve do when she was talking a little too much with the serpent, giving away too much? Keep in mind St. Benedict's rule. And told here, ooh, that's female. Is the devil or the whatever principle of evil has entered into the serpent a female? No. We still have some gender, some grammatical gender. And the word neder is a feminine noun. And so when you refer to a feminine noun, it's not it, it's her. So, and told here, all that lesson that God here hevde ilered. And Eve blabbed all of the stuff that God had told her. Ilered, hevde, you see an F there. All of that's eventually going to scrunch up into the word had, but there's still stuff in the middle, the F and the E on the end. Ilered, we've seen how the Old English ya prefix, ge, pronounced ya, has turned into just an I or a Y prefix for past verbs in Middle English. Here it's an I. Had taught her. And Adam of den apple, and what God had told to Adam regarding the apple when the snake questioned her. And so the veond, that's an F sound, believe it or not. That U is kind of schizophrenic, going all kinds of directions. It's a U, a V, and an F right now. We're figuring it out. And so the feond, thur, we still use thorns here. And notice that metathesis has not yet happened to this word. It's through, R before the vowel now. It was thur, R after the vowel then. And it ends with that non-initial H. And so the fiend, thur here ward. Oh, ward is plural there. You can tell by the ending on here. We still hadn't absolutely generalized the S plural. And so the fiend understood through her words a non-recht, a non-right, immediately. Here wokeness. And ifond, another past with a V as an F, way toward her of her forlorenness. Do you hear the word forlorn in there? Forlorn, or modern German verloren, means lostness. So how did the fall come about? The devil found a way to get at Eve because of what she related to the devil through her talking about what God had told her. Giant but, rather on the contrary, ura, yes, that's ura, not fra or vra. That's ura levdi Saint Mary. Our Lady did all another ways. Our Lady Mary did things very differently. You remember the etymology of lady? Hlaf die, loaf nieder. You can still see it in there, right? It's not quite scrunched up into lady yet. She did all another ways. And there we have an eth. Ne told heo den engle non talla. This is the Annunciation. Not enunciation. That's to say your words very precisely. Annunciation, like announce. When Gabriel, the angel, is told in the Gospels, comes to Mary and says, you are going to bear a child which will be Christ, the long-awaited Savior. And the thing about Mary is the Bible says she did not reply. She quickly asked one question, but she treasured these things up in her heart and sang a song in her heart. But she was not chatty. So Our Lady Mary did all in other ways. I wanted to point out the double negative. Ne told heo den engle non tala. She not told the angel no tale. In every non-modern Western language, in every sort of non-enlightenment society, if one negative is negative, then two negatives are not positive. That's math, that's not language, are more negatives. Chaucer at one point has a whopping quadruple negative, which is just really, really negative. So she did not at all tell the angel any tale. By the way, we don't have a do. Today we would say she did not tell the angel any tale. But do would not arise until the 1700s as questioning, do you eat snails? They would have said, eat you snails? And they wouldn't have said, she did not tell. They would say, not told she. So do that strange placeholder where it has not arisen yet. Auch is the Old English ak, meaning but. Askeda. Notice it's not axion anymore. We have had metathesis for this word. Spoonerisming. Axion has become askeda. The K and the S sounds have switched. Him thing shortliche, that heu nekutha, that she did not know. She quickly asked one question, briefly, that she did not know. Nekutha. Notice it's not, there's no did. We don't have did or do yet. The thing that she not knew. And couth, as in uncouth, right? Knowing and not knowing how to believe. So now an address to the, I think, 3 women this book is addressed to. Advice on how to be a good anchoress. Ye mina leova, that's like love, beloved, sustren. Today we have brother, and we know the old plural brethren. We only use it for sort of the Amish. But there used to be brethren and sustren went away. But that used to have an en plural too. Followeth, that U is a V, followeth ura levdi and not the kakala Eve. That's where my title comes from. Follow Our Lady, Mary, and not the cackling Eve. For the ancra, therefore an anchoress, what seheobeo, whatever or maybe whoever she might be, as muchel as heo ever con, as much as she ever can manage it, and may and can, hold her still. You got that, right? And now we do a bit of an animal allegory, in which the author is going to prove the same point, allegorically, by referring to animals, metaphorically, a common didactic and preaching tool in the Middle Ages. Nabba is a contraction of ne haba, and haba was have. So this is an imperative contraction, have not. It's let her not have. Ne have, heo, not. That's also a double negative. Ne have not, henne kunde. A hens, that's genitive, kunde. That's our word kind, kunde. Our word kind originally meant nature. The nature of something was its kind, its species, its sort. So don't have a hen's nature. Okay, tell me about hens. The hen, huan, the H and the double have not metastasized yet, so we have HW, hwa, not wa, which is more of a W, but a little bit of an H off of it, aspirated. When heo haveth laid, that's the past with an I, when she's laid an egg, nekon but cackelen, can do nothing but cackle. I'm not a chicken person. We raised some meat birds for a few years. Didn't get to the point where they laid eggs. But apparently when a hen lays an egg, at least according to them, they weren't the greatest observers of animals in the Middle Ages, weren't much given to empirical science, but they observed that hens cackle after they lay an egg. Okay. And they can't do anything else. And what beyit heo thereof? And what does she get, the hen, from that cackling? Well, in our allegory, cometh the kova, comes the chuff bird, or maybe you can just think of it as a crow. The crow hears this cackling, and what do crows like to eat? Again, I have no idea if this is real biology or not, but that's what they imagined. But they also imagined that pelicans were sent to us to be Christ figures, because when a pelican's child is hungry, when the baby pelican is starving, the mommy pelican will use her long beak to poke at her breast until flesh and blood come out, and then they feed their babies the flesh and blood of their breast. And of course that's a reminder of what Christ does in feeding us in the Mass, in the Eucharist. Only one slight problem. Pelicans don't do that. They must have only seen pelicans from a distance. And yet it's enough for Dante, in his Divine Comedy, to say, Christ our pelican, and move on, because we all know what that means. In any case, so when the hen has cackled, cometh the kof, an onrecht, right away, and raveth. Remember Bereavodon, which is what happened to the traveler in the Good Samaritan? raveth and robs away her iron, of her iron. This is an important word. Today we have eggs. Back then, if you were in Chaucer's dialect, and a little bit later, 1 egg, 2 eggs. But if you were in the West Midlands, you had 1 egg, 2 iron. There's even a story that Caxton will print in the 1500s about some people who are, they're British, and I think they leave from London on the Thames maybe, and they sail for a while. They hit a different part of England, and they're starving, and they wash up on the shore of their own country, and they say, oh, please, can we have some eggs? And the folks are like, have some what? In Middle English, of course, because they don't have eggs where they are. They have iron. Children, brethren, sustren, iron. And fret, and if you know German, they have a word for animals eating. People eating is essen. German animals eating is fressen. We used to have a word in English for eating, but animals doing the eating. That's the animal word. So you wouldn't apply fret to a person. So in any way, the chuff comes and fret all that of what her shoulder forth bringen her quicke bredes. Quick here means live, the quick and the dead. Bredes has the R in front of the I instead of where it ends up later. Oh, so she was supposed to bring forth quick, living birds, but the chuff heard her cackling and came and gobbled them up. And richt also, here's our sort of interpretation, the luthere kova deovel. Luther is our word loathe, like I loathe you, but an adjective. The loathly chuff, the devil, beareth away from the kakelende Ancrene. You see how we just linked to the last slide? And forswalloweth all that good that he istreonet habeth. So somehow the devil bears away from the cackling Anchoress, an Anchoress who talks a lot, violating her vow of silence, and forswalloweth. For is a intensifying prefix. It's in German, verschlingen is what the wolf does to Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother, gulps her down intensively. Well, here the devil swallows up intensively all of that good that she has brought forth, leading us to ask, what's the good that an anchoress brings forth? She's not out there sawing wood or selling turnips. What good is she bringing forth in the world? And how did it get swallowed up? And how did that swallowing up come as a result of her cackling or excessive talking? To continue the sense, all the good that she has brought forth, as if, giving birth to, that should as brides, now metaphorically as birds, bearen him up toward heaven, if hit nere I kakeled, who should as birds bear themselves up towards heaven, like to receive her reward, if it had not been cackled about. And nere is ne were, were not. Another contraction. Very useful, but one we've lost. The next bit addresses the question, should an anchoress, if she's supposed to, what is it? Oh yes, shut up. What about confession? Well, here's the answer. To some ghostliche man, go to a ghostly man, you'll find them in, cemeteries and haunted houses. Nah, spiritual man, that ye been strusty upon. Trusty used to have an S on it, strusty. That you trust. Go to some spiritual man that you trust. That implies that there are priests who can hear confession. Oh, only men could hear confession. So even in a nunnery with a prioress, if to have the sacrament of confession, you had to go to a man. So to some spiritual man that you trust, as you muin bin of it, as you might be of it, God is, that is it good, that he asken, there's a plural ending on that, red, advice, and salve, or salve. This is salve, like salve you put on an ointment, but spiritual. That you ask advice and salve, that he teach you to jenes fondunges, that he teach you against temptations. And in a schrift, showeth him yif, that is yif with a fronted G because of the I, front vowel, yif he will hearen, and show him if he will hear. Wow, maybe they would refuse to hear. Or greatest and or loathlooketh sunnen. That's the word loathly again. And your most loathsome sins. In other words, we're talking about shrift. You might have heard the term short shrift. To give someone short shrift is not to pay them enough attention or to not do your job thoroughly regarding them. But shrift was confession. And the original short shrift was, if you're a priest, to not spend enough time asking questions, investigating the sins of the person who's confessing, so that they get a full and complete confession before God to forgive their sins. So do all that, for that he him arue you, so that he may pity you. You know the word rue, like you'll rue the day, regret, so that he may pity you. Oh, wow. Your salvation's depended on him pitying you. And through the bereveness, and through that pity, cria Christ inwardly to mercy. He will inwardly cry Christ to mercy on your behalf, intercessory, because in the medieval system you depend on that priest for your forgiveness. For you, and have you in the munde and in his bonen. Have you in his mind and in his bones. Actually, these are prayers. It's related to the word ban. When you got married in the Middle Ages, you published the bans. There's another word for that which is related to it, and in his prayers. So he has the direct line to God, which he will intercede for you. Modern Catholicism has taken some of these doctrines and made them more progressive. It's not put everyone's connection to God only in the hands of the priest, though he's there to be an intercessory, an aiding intermediary for the Catholic parishioner. But you were in a much more gender difficult circumstances in the Middle Ages. And finally, a little caveat, and we'll end with this. A little danger involved in the advice just given. Confess to a priest if you trust him. Auch, but witteth, wit is your wits, to survive by your wits is your knowledge. Witteth yo, know, and beoth you are, and beware, he said, our Lord, for money cometh to you is shrewd mit lombes fleose, and beoth woda wolves. So our Lord said, he's telling the anchoresses, many come to you in wolf's clothing, and appear in sheep's clothing rather, but are actually wolves. You know that verse? So many come to you, shrewd, mit lombes wolves, and beoth woda wolves. So we got a W in there, hey. And you've got a U, which is U, and we've got a U, which is a V. And so that word has just all of the different U's, V's, and W's, and double V's going on right inside it. But more interesting is the word wode for mad. Can you think of what word that is cognate with that we still have today? It's old-fashioned today, but it exists. You know the word, you don't use it. That is cognate with wode. It has to do with dating, and wode has a kind of ed on it, like having done this. And it was originally a word for insanity. I'll let you ponder that for the homework. So, and then this advice to the women who are shut up in these anchoress cells. Worldliche, liche is perfect German liche, but in English it's been reduced to li. Worldly men, he leaveth lute. Don't trust worldly men. And you think he's going to say, but trust spiritual men, priests. Religiosa, yet lesser, but trust priests even less. So the entire issue, which we're having in the modern day of is every religious person trustworthy, has your best interest in mind, is not new. Be skeptical of worldly people, and even more skeptical of religious priests. Ne wilnje je not too much hur kuthleching. Not will yourself not too much of hur, and this is perfect Old English, kuthlechung. Kuth is know, to know, right? Kuth and uncouth. And that's like latching on to. Do not desire too much there, that is, priests, latching on to them to know them. Don't get to know many religious priests, pastors. There's danger in talking, even to men, even if they're a priest, even if it's in confession. Eva, and now we return to a summary, and where we started. Eva, without dread, sprek mit teneder. Eve, without any fear, or without any restraint, spoke with the neder. Urlevdi was of dread of Gabriel's speech. She was not exactly dreading his speech, more like she was modestly quiet in response to his speech. And thus, how did things go with Eve? How did things go with Mary? That's a pretty big antithesis in Christian thought. And here you have the gendered advice to some anchorists about how to apply that, along with some nice animal imagery for today. That's our excerpt from the Ancrene of Riwle. I give it to you, by the way, because we're approaching a unit project in which we're going to be looking at Chaucer's Prioress and thinking about both gender and religion, religious women in the Middle Ages. And this is a bit of background that is both for this assignment and will also be useful for that project.